The new year arrives as it has since the beginning of time, with nature's own celebration. In the mists of early morning, Lion Island rests peacefully guarding the entrance to the mighty Hawksbury River. Towering sandstone cliffs have worn and weathered with the ages.
Once, many Aboriginal people, the Ku-ring-gai and Darug and others, lived and thrived along the river. Tribes are long gone, but the heritage they left behind includes some of the continent's finest galleries of cave painting and rock carving.
These days, craft of all types ply the waters, and fishermen laze away the hours, hoping to share the river's bounty. Houses huddle together. Along this part of the river, all have one thing in common. Access is by water only.
Governor Phillip came here within months of establishing the colony at Sydney Cove. It's said that if he were to return today, he'd have little difficulty recognising most of his campsites.
We approach Australia's fjordland. 19th century writer Anthony Trollope compared the Hawkesbury to the Rhine in Europe and the Mississippi in America. He said, "The headlands are higher and the bluffs are bolder, and the maneuvers of the course which the waters have made for themselves are grander and for me more enchanting than those of either the European or American river." Although Wiseman's Ferry has been upgraded many times since Solomon Wiseman ran a hand-drawn punt here more than a century ago, the powers that be have decided that still no bridge shall span this part of the river.
Water turns from salt to fresh, and we wind our way through river flats farmed for food that saved the new colony from starvation in the early days. The river is navigable as far as the Macquarie town of Windsor, where some buildings were designed by the great colonial architect Francis Greenway.
Once, this river was a wild, untamed thing. When rains came, great torrents of water stormed through the valley, causing havoc. But it cleansed the river and renewed the land. To serve the city of Sydney and its increasing suburban sprawl, the river was caged, its spirit tamed, and the waters imprisoned by a giant wall. More than enough water was dammed to meet the needs of a growing metropolis into the 21st century. But what has happened to the river? It struggles to survive. It will take changing attitudes of government and the concern of people who care if the beauty and well-being of this magnificent place is to remain.
One warm summer's day, we drove from the city into the countryside along the old northern road towards the Hawkesbury River at Wiseman's Ferry.
Well, do you think you'd like to live down here, right?
There was an abundance of natural bushland and very little traffic.
We'd been here before, but we weren't aware of the relaxed pace of life and the atmosphere in this village that still retains many links with the earliest colonial days. The post office was built when the mail still came upriver by boat. Helen Andrews has been postmistress here for nearly half a century. We wanted to know about the people and what it would be like to live here.
Some have just come and gone. We don't see them again. But those who came because they found the mountains and the river and the beauty of the place. It just was too much. It got such a grip on them. They decided that here they'd found their little bit of heaven, and here they're going to stay.
With a recommendation like that, we decided to see what we could find. There were properties right on the water with stunning river views. As we looked around, there were blocks of land suitable for mountain goats. There were shacks built as weekenders and some very attractive houses. Then we saw it. A small, unpretentious place tucked in under a sandstone outcrop with land gently sloping right down to the river's edge. A walkway through the mangrove forest stretched out to a wide expanse of the river. For me, it was love at first sight. There'd be a whole new world of birds, bushland, and waterways to explore.
We negotiated the price and were committed to buying the property that would change our lifestyle forever. As we settled into a routine, the trees took on their russet hues with the onset of autumn. The garden was coming along nicely.
Tropical plants, the exotic red passion flower, and the Queensland firewheel tree had bloomed during the heat of summer, and rainforest plants thrived under a canopy of native trees. Violets and maidenhair fern formed an attractive ground cover, and a family of king parrots became regular visitors.
When we decided to do some building, we discovered the camaraderie of our neighbors. The delivery truck arrived, and so did our friends. They came armed with tools and enthusiasm. The job was done in no time, and that spirit of helping each other continues to be part of the joy of life on the river.
The fishing village of Spencer has always been a gathering place for riverboats and fishermen. It was originally known as Fernley, but the name was changed around the time of the Second World War. The Hannahs have owned the boat shed at Spencer for many years. Mrs. Hannah is one of the few remaining river personalities.
This is where I did my schooling. School started in 1922.
And what was Spencer like in the early days?
Not very much. Only some beautiful old families. Hibbs came out here with Captain Cook, and when he stepped on the land, he thought, this looks promising. So he came out on his own when Captain Cook went back, and he settled on various points of our shores. And he had, you know, his generations lived over opposite here at Wendouree Park, and there was one we called Old Bonnety. She rode the mail to Central Mangrove and back each day.
The river has many ghost stories.
Oh, well, that's down at Green Man. They call it the haunted place. Samuel Taylor came out here and built the first inn there, and he was a married man, and he had a girl working for him called Elizabeth Bridge, and he got her in the family way. He murdered her, and that's why they feel it's haunted. She comes out occasionally. People see her at night, long frock, long flowing hair, and stands. And she is buried up here in Mangrove Creek in a gully, and her headstone is still there. Elizabeth Bridge I am, and that's why I'm lying here. The pain was so severe. That is up the creek now.
A new generation of Spencer residents meets for a beer each day at the famous Dunkirk bar. A wooden table under the shade of an old mangrove tree provides the only creature comfort. The rusting sign is said to have been souvenired from a Sydney hotel. Patrons come and drink a can or two to pass the time as the setting sun colours the river and twilight creeps up into sheltered creeks. We accepted an invitation from our friends, Rob and Therese, to view the bridge-to-bridge race from their cruiser. Rob had volunteered to be one of the marshals. Our position was to be at Lower Portland, so it's an early start for a steady 2-hour run up river. On arrival, the course is surveyed and hazards removed from the water. The flag is out, and here they come. The river's shattered by powerboats that race along its entire length with speed and noise, exploding the river's tranquility. The race begins at Brooklyn and finishes at the Windsor Bridge.
When Governor Phillip led the first voyage of exploration to the upper reaches of the Hawksbury River, Dr. Thomas Arndell, assistant surgeon to the First Fleet, was among the party. Later, he settled on a land grant of 600 acres. He built Caddy Cottage, and for generations, the Arndell family farmed the land and added to the cottage. On part of the property, known as Hope Farm, Thomas Arndell built a windmill complex. The buildings were primitive, and no one knows much about them. Martin Smith of the National Parks and Wildlife Service hopes to learn more.
This is the remains of the Arndell mill site. Very little is known about this mill. It's believed to be the oldest industrial site of European origin in Australia. To help fill in some of the question marks that this site raises, the National Parks and Wildlife Service will be engaging in a major archaeological survey of this area early next year. It's not known what exactly we'll find in the dig, but it's hoped that the material that is collected will help answer some of the questions that remain about when this site was built, what it was used for.
As generations passed in the Arndell family, conditions were harsh and floods were devastating. In the 1980s, Caddy Park was taken over to be preserved as Cateye National Park, a historic monument and recreation area.
The Arndell farm and the historical fabric which surrounds it is on the National Estate of Australia. I believe it's a very important part of this nation's cultural heritage because it displays quite clearly a working farm, a farm that isn't representative of the ruling culture of the time, but of a typical Australian farming family. The period of occupation of the Arndell family on this patch of ground was over 180 years, probably unrivalled in our recent history. For 7 generations, the Arndell family worked this country as a farm right through to 1980. And really it's only ever had 3 owners. The Aboriginal people prior to 1790 when the land grant was first taken up, the Arndell family from then right through to 1980, and now the people of New South Wales through the National Parks and Wildlife Service own the land and operate it as a very important part of our cultural heritage.
The park has become a popular place for family picnics. The wharf is a pickup point for Windsor cruisers. Captain Ian Clayton transported his cruise boat to the Hawksbury from its former workplace in the Snowy Mountains.
When the vessel was operating down on Lake Yukonbing, she was called the Snowy, and we didn't think that was a very appropriate name for the river, and so we called her the Durubban, which is what the Darug tribe of Aborigines used to call the river before Phillip changed its name to the Hawksbury, after Baron Hawksbury back in London. Yes, we start from the bridge at Windsor, and we offer a number of different cruises. We have our all-day Tizana winery cruise, where we cruise down to Sackville, stop over at the lovely old Tizana winery down there, built in 1887 for a very nice luncheon and dessert and wine tasting. Then we also do a cruise that runs the full navigable length of the river from Windsor right through to Brooklyn.
Passengers are entranced by glimpses of wildlife that can be seen from the deck.
Tizana Winery is a beautiful old stone building at Sackville Reach, reminiscent of wineries in the Mediterranean area of Europe. The land was acquired by Dr. Thomas Fiaschi, who came from Italy in 1875. The winery was built in 1887 and named Tisana after his village near Florence. He began to produce the light red Italian-style wines from his vineyard. Although the original building became derelict and the vineyards died, the vines were replanted and were once again being grown to make a local red wine. The present owners, Peter and Caroline Auld, have spent many years restoring everything with meticulous attention to the original detail.
We have a range of wines that we can offer you here. We have got a range of red wines which we make on the premises and ports. And in addition to that, we have a range of wines that we bottle under the Tisana Selection label that will allow you to taste a full range of wines from a number of areas in Australia. This is an example of the local Cabernet Sauvignon, which you might like to enjoy. Thank you, Peter. I'm sure you'll enjoy this one, Ken. It's very nice. Well, we open the winery here on the weekends and public holidays, from 12 till 6 on Saturdays and Sundays and public holidays. And we have groups coming in for special conducted wine tastings as well. And but we don't mind people dropping in on the weekends for those special tastings and so on.
Morning mists settle along the river as the crisp, chilled air of winter arrives. The valley of Gunderman Creek was given as a land grant in June of 1823. Prolonged periods of drought, interspersed by violent floods, eventually drove some of the settlers away. When businessman Bob Lapointe discovered this place in the 1960s, it was almost derelict, but the beauty of the river reminded him of Canada, his homeland.
I think the Hawksbury's fantastic. It's unfortunate there's been so much negative publicity because I guess having lived on it for so long, I tend to, and in this part of the Hawksbury anyway, it's extremely attractive. The river is beautiful, and I think it compares to a lot of the rivers of the world, some that are more famous because I guess a lot more people have viewed them. If the same numbers of people viewed the Hawksbury, I think they'd think it was the most beautiful river in the world.
These days, Muskoka is a top-class racing establishment.
We've had, considerable success. I've owned most of my horses in partnership with others, and we've won about 600 or so races over many years, the last dozen or so years, and won a lot of very good races, derbies and oaks and various different races. Muskoka, as a training operation, has been a unique opportunity for us. It provides a chance to train horses in a very quiet country environment, and some of the leading trainers in the country, like Colin Hayes and Bruce McLaughlin in Brisbane, have similar setups, and they've always advocated that horses will do their best in a country-type environment.
A full-time staff is employed to look after and train the thoroughbred horses. More staff takes care of the property. And although Muskoka performs as a working farm, close attention to environment and wildlife habitat makes this one of the most beautiful places along the Hawksbury.
In most country areas, youngsters catch the bus to school, but this one has a driver that is different to most. He's a friend to all the children, sometimes helps with their homework. Everyone in the district knows Patrick. He has a smile and wave for all. A former university lecturer in botany, Patrick Matthew has opted for the river lifestyle. He's now in his element, spending all his spare time wandering through the bushland, exploring, observing and documenting. Years ago, he made a unique botanical discovery.
This is Acacia matthewi, and about 20 years ago I was wandering through the bush around here and I came across this very strange stringy barked wattle. The exciting thing about it is that it doesn't even look like a wattle. Most people would pick it as a stringy bark tree. It's got a great big thick trunk, stringy bark, shiny leaves and yellow wattle flowers. Actually the flowers are just about at the end of the season. There is one just there that you might be able to see. And my hobby around here is looking at the plants in the national park that's around here. And discovering that this was unknown to science, I took it to the National Herbarium in Sydney, and 20 years later down the track they named it after me. My name being Patrick Matthew, they called it Acacia matthewi. Well, one of the things that I greatly enjoy about being a botanist in this area is that the main geological formation around here is thick sandstone called the Hawksbury sandstone all around the Hawksbury River. And the variety of plants in the Hawksbury sandstone is among the greatest of anywhere in the world. A statistic you might be interested in is that within the Darug National Park on the banks of the Hawksbury, I've personally collected well over 60 different species of orchids. A lot of people think orchids grow in rainforests. We have 60 different species here.
Winding up the sheer sandstone cliffs on the northern side of the river is one of the most remarkable engineering feats of the 19th century. This part of the Great North Road, known as Devine's Hill, was quarried out of sandstone by convicts shackled with leg irons. After nearly 200 years, it's still in remarkable condition. It's reminiscent of the incredible human effort used to construct the great buildings that survive from antiquity. The road is now part of Darug National Park, and to preserve what remains, it's closed to motor traffic. Bob Brawley is one of the National Park's discovery rangers. Neil Martin has been associated with Darug National Park for more than 20 years, and listening to him is like taking a journey back into history.
Is it myth or legend about the whips and lashes and that and the overseers?
Well, I think probably the overseers weren't particularly nice people. From what I can read, they certainly weren't. You know, you wouldn't take them home to meet Mum, that's for sure. But this idea that the convicts got beaten and hung and drawn and quartered and got a terribly hard time and got the lash and everything else, I think that well, we know that that's all mythology because the judicial process was well established in Australia by 1828. It's all drywall construction, there's no mortar used in it. The rocks were moved into place with things like rollers and shear legs. The big stones weigh anything up to a tonne.
Neil, Hangman's Rock here is probably the best known feature of this area. There's a lot of myth and legend as to what its real purpose was, such as dropping people by the neck through the hole there. Can you tell us what was it really used for?
Well, Bob, I'm glad you mentioned that because the folklore and the myth of the Hangman's Rock is something that gets, I guess, goes from generation to generation. Of course, as we discussed earlier on, the judicial process was really well established by the time the convicts were coming up here. So there wasn't summary executions and people weren't tied to the tree up above and hung there. It makes a lovely story and it looks great, but I think it's it's a lovely story, so let's leave it at that. But what we think it really was used for, we think it was where the supervisor sat and probably had a bit of a shelter up there that he could keep out of the weather, and it was somewhere where he could watch the people working on the road construction.
Solomon Wiseman arrived in Sydney as a convict. Assigned to his wife Jane, his career as a Sydney merchant prospered. Governor Macquarie granted him 200 acres of land along the Hawksbury, where he built his mansion, Cobham Hall. He acquired a hand-operated punt to ferry people and produce over the river, opened an inn called the Sign of the Packet, and won the contract to supply provisions to the convict road gangs. Although the Sydney gentry called him the Merchant Prince, his provisions were often rotten and mouldy, and the convicts had some terrible names for him. In spite of all his misdemeanours, the village still retains his name, Wiseman's Ferry, and Cobham Hall is the Wiseman's Ferry Hotel. While retaining the atmosphere of its colonial origins, it is catching up with the needs of today. There's a village shopping centre. With everything to welcome a visitor, the country retreat caters for accommodation, meals and recreation.
The ferry, now the oldest in Australia, is protected by a heritage rating. Operated by private contractors for the Road Transport Authority, it runs 24 hours every day and 7 days a week, except when the river floods. These days, the ferrymaster is a lady, and all the regular travellers know Esme Barron.
People say to me, does it get boring? And I said, never. You know, I said, yeah, but you're going from bank to bank every day, 8 hours, and each trip is different because people are coming up asking directions and asking questions about where's this, where's that. The local people always come up. I mean, you might only have 2 minutes on the water, but it's really good, and the time goes really quick. I mean, no sooner you get to work, then it's time to knock off again.
There's always paperwork.
And that form is, well, it has to be filled in, dividing up all the different vehicles, like trucks, cars, four-wheel drives, bikes, and then it has cattle, sheep, which we don't usually have. Occasionally you might get an odd one. But I usually put them down as bikes or scooters or something. There's a lot of stories I could not say because people just would not believe some of the things that do happen on a ferry. But it is fun. I've had a lot of people say, you know, I love that job. I say, no way, I wouldn't trade this for anyone.
Spring arrives along the ridgetops, and orchards and flower gardens come into bloom. Citrus trees flower and fruit in abundance. Stone fruits blossom in springtime to bear their crop when the heat of summer comes. Market gardens lie against the imposing backdrop of the distant Blue Mountains. Many of these properties are owned and worked by a close-knit Australian-Italian community.
Horse riding and equestrian sports have long been favourite activities with the river people, so it's a big event when the rodeo comes to town. The atmosphere is much the same as was the old-time circus. Most riders and their horses follow the rodeo cavalcade right around Australia.
Get your horns down. It's big crowd goes up to the left.
It's a great day with a lot of exciting action. The unsung hero of ring performances is the rodeo clown. He's out in the front line all the time, skillfully entertaining the crowd while he diverts the enraged animals' attention away from riders.
Chainsaw's got his quick victory once again. The 7 times Australian.
Even the infamous chainsaw seems to hold no fear for him. But behind the clown's paint, he's more realistic.
To me, it is dangerous all the time. There's always that danger there. But probably because I've been doing it, I was brought up with cattle, and it's as dangerous to me. It's as dangerous as walking across the road. If you don't keep your wits about you, you're going to get hurt. And being a rodeo clown, you know you're going to get hurt. It's just when and how bad. I'm pretty confident with all the bull riders, and they're confident with me. Well, and I see they voted me as best in Australia the last 3 years, so...
That's very good, isn't it?
Yeah, so it all helps out. And if you got their confidence, it's much easier. But doing the comedy as well as the bullfighting, it's a little different, because if you're just doing the bullfighting, you have to pump yourself up because that adrenaline gets that high.
Yeah.
And then to do comedy, you have to just totally relax again, and it's too different. It's a lot of mental strain.
In the historic old cemetery at Wiseman's Ferry are the graves of many of the district's pioneers. Among others, many generations of the Lawton family are buried here. The settlement of Lawtondale was named after John Lawton, who settled there and raised a large family in the 1840s. They became highly respected for their boat-building ability. Lawton descendants still live there. Hawksbury prawns are famous, and prawning is one of the few remaining river industries. Rod, a fifth-generation Lawton, is a licensed trawler operator, and when the prawns are running, he's on the river.
The Lawtons have prawned for probably 40 years. I've prawned for 17 of them for myself. It all started off years ago when they used to walk the shores here around the mangroves. One bloke could row a little paddle boat out from the bank, and another bloke could walk the shores, and that's how it all started back in the early days. Where we are here at Lower Hawksbury, the river is a river, and a river as it should be. It rises and falls as a tide should. Up the river further where we say there's closures to prawning. Prawns don't spawn up in the closures, they spawn at the mouth of the estuaries at sea, and they travel up the estuary to grow. So therefore it's not really a spawning area, to me it's a storage area. When they're an adult prawn, they'll come back, they'll go back to sea, and we can catch them as they go back.
The valley of the MacDonald River is called the Forgotten Valley. This is a journey back into the past. Beautifully restored buildings, the Victoria, sometimes called Sternbeck's Inn, and Primrose Hill, called in later years the Butler House, were built by pioneer families. Facing the river at St Albans, the Settlers' Arms Inn was first licensed in 1836 and is still operating as a hotel. Further north, a sign marks the entrance to St Albans Common. One of the few remaining in Australia, the Common is administered by a trust. Some residents retain the right to graze their stock on common land. The road passes through superb wetlands, home to many species of waterbirds and wildlife. In a secluded valley, we visit potter Susie Startin and her husband Gil. They've chosen life here as a peaceful alternative to city living.
We wanted a building that was both a living space and a workspace, and a workspace that was as attractive and stimulating a place to be as the living space itself. So that's why we've got a pottery that is both working space and our home.
Living here just brought me much more closely in contact with the wildlife. So in my work, some of the designs have come directly from living here. Goannas, lyrebirds, some of the flowers, the bottle brushes and the wattle.
In keeping with their natural environment, there's no electricity in this isolated valley, so the potter's wheel is foot-powered. Sculptural works, bowls and plates to decorate a distinctive table are Susie's forte. Colours and designs reflect the bushland scene. It's intriguing to watch the design materialise. Susie's work is available in many galleries, and soon in her own St Albans gallery in St Albans Village.
On any weekend, powerboats and water skiers crowd parts of the river. We found canoeing more our pace. Gliding into uninhabited reaches of a secluded creek can reveal an unexpected world. On a weekend in late October, the Hawksbury River near Windsor comes alive with hundreds of people with canoes. The shore is a hive of activity as people register their craft, organise provisions and undergo strict safety checks. They come from miles away to join the Hawksbury Classic Paddle, sometimes called the Moonlight Marathon. It's organised as a fundraiser for the Bone Marrow Transplant Foundation. The journey will finish at Brooklyn, 110 kilometres downstream, and the fastest canoes are expected to make the trip in around 12 hours. The rest will paddle in at their leisure. At 4:30 p.m, the Classic gets underway. Some start with an energetic burst, while others begin as they mean to continue. Checkpoints are located along the river, and every contestant must report at each one. This gives an accurate check on the location of every canoe on the river.
Number 2 as you go past. 138, thanks very much.
Each craft is also accompanied by a land crew who will follow by road to checkpoints and be waiting at the finishing line. Canoes paddle on into the sunset. The bulk of time will be travelled during the night. This can sometimes cause problems, and canoeists have been known to find themselves up a creek. Dawn sees the tail-enders stretched out along the river with not much energy or competitive spirit left. At the finishing point, all of the front runners have already checked in, but many participants have yet to arrive.
Is this your first time you've tried?
No, the 11th.
11? How was it this time?
Oh, it's pretty good right till the end when the wind started, and then it was a bit choppy and a bit hard. My hands, they will puff up and I won't be able to use them tomorrow, but at the moment they're not too bad. They'll be all right.
It's a tremendous effort to do that.
It's
a long way.
It's a terrific weekend. I have a ball. I think everyone does.
Still they come, wet, cold and hungry. And the consensus of opinion is it was great fun. And they'll be back again next year.
Come to think of it, it would be fun, but somehow I don't think we'd make the distance. The oppressive heat of summer has arrived. Citrus trees are laden and spring blossom has developed into luscious fruit to be picked in time for a Hawksbury Christmas. It seems as though the entire population of our village has turned out for carols by candlelight. Santa's helpers, wise men and little angels, can be sighted everywhere. Local schools present their carefully rehearsed Yuletide greetings. As most reindeers are otherwise occupied at this time of year, it seems quite appropriate for Santa to arrive on his own special vehicle. To the children's delight, the local bushfire brigade truck, looking all red and Christmassy, comes in with lights blazing and, with the usual ho-ho-hos, Santa distributes the goodies. Darkness creeps in and candles are lit as the Salvation Army band plays familiar carols. We've been seduced by the seasons of the river. Our family has gathered together to have Christmas dinner outdoors. The table's loaded with local produce, prawns, oysters, and fruit and salads from the local farms. Even the very best of wine comes from vineyards in the nearby Hunter Valley. Under the shade of the gum trees, a Hawksbury Christmas is very informal and completely relaxed.
We've lived here for several years now and have come to accept the many moods of the river. Floods come, sometimes without warning. Watching the waters and wondering how high they'll rise can be a very tense time. Our little house has stood here untouched through many big floods. So we just wait until everything returns to normal.
Bushfire, that's another story. It starts with wisps of smoke wafting up the hillside. Often these fires are deliberately lit, and when the hot summer winds dry out the undergrowth, we know there can be trouble. Beyond the ridges, you don't see walls of flame coming towards you. There's only a bright orange bank of impenetrable smoke which approaches with unbelievable speed. Fire services swing into action, and all we can do is hope. Because of the river, we know our lives are not in danger, but it is a very frightening experience. Just as it approaches our group of houses, the fire front changes direction. It burns out of control across the hilltops and through bushland before jumping the river and roaring up another ridge. The final count sees 14,000 hectares, 97% of Durrag National Park ravaged by the fire.
In some unfathomable way, nature has the power to make things right. A light shower of rain comes, and within days the bushland has begun to regenerate. Disasters are soon forgotten. A new generation finds pleasure in the discovery of all things that survive in nature's environment.
Not on the bird, but they have other feathers in their tail as well.
The river reflects its images in many ways: the lifestyle of its people, the passing of the seasons, and the preservation of the ages. Stories and reflections come and go, changing a little each time with the color and the light, but always reflecting mighty crags that have watched over moving waters and the lives of the inhabitants since time began.